In today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about the process of learning. Now, I know that sounds potentially like boring. I don't know, maybe if you're a nerd like me, that sounds exciting. But what I'll say here is actually learning something. Like, I can teach you copywriting and marketing skills, right? If you just consume it and you never learn it, you're not going to make all the money promised by copywriters, right? So if you're just like consuming these episodes or any other information about marketing, business, copywriting, all that stuff, right? If you're just consuming it, but you're not actually learning it, internalizing it, applying it, then you will, all the potential income possible in marketing and entrepreneurship is going to be out of your reach. And so today, I want to talk about the actual 3-step process to learning any skill, including copywriting. So let's dive into these notes. This is based on not just like somebody's assumptions. This is based on people who study learning, people who study curriculum design, people who are focused on the science of learning. So here's how to learn anything according to learning experts. It's actually a 3-step process. Step number 1 is acquire. You have to acquire the information. Step number 2 is encode the information. That is essentially saving the information for later. And step number 3 is retrieving the information. And if you're not able to acquire, encode, and retrieve the information, you're not going to be able to use that information going forward. And so consumption alone, just like listening to every episode that I put out, right? Or even if you were to invest in the membership that I offer at BTMSinsiders or any other training out there, right? Consumption alone is very shallow learning. And it's not going to give you the resources that you need going forward to apply what you're learning about, whether we're talking copywriting or anything else. If you go beyond consumption, which is acquire, the acquisition of information, and you also do the encoding of the information and the retrieval of the information, and we're going to go deeper into each of these steps. If you go through all 3 steps, that's what's required to go deep into the knowledge, to actually develop the skills behind the knowledge, right? So if you're interested in becoming a better copywriter, it's not just about listening. It's not just about acquiring information. It's about all 3 steps. So you want to learn copywriting. Let's talk about step number 1. Well, you're doing the right thing right now. This is the first step, and it's an essential first step. You can't just show up and be like, oh, I already know everything that I need to know. Then you just sound like a middle schooler. You can't show up and say, I already know everything that I need to know, so I'm just going to go do it, right? Acquiring knowledge it's like planting seeds, right? And this is step 1. So what you're doing when you're listening to this episode, when you're listening to anything else that I put out, when you are, when you're like reading books, when you're whatever, right? When you're consuming information, you're planting seeds. Now, seeds planted in sand don't germinate, right? Seeds planted where there's not fertile soil don't germinate. And so it's not just enough to plant the seeds, but that is an essential step if you want the fruit in the end. So anything that you can do to turn to experts, to see examples, if you're studying marketing that's out in the world, right? All of that is planting seeds in the garden of your mind, right? And it's essential. And so initially, if you want to learn something, you're going to acquire a lot of knowledge. And I feel like that's the most known, the most obvious step of this. So let's move to step number 2. Step number 2 is about encoding. Now, that's essentially like saving. Like if you encode information on a hard drive, you're saving the information on a hard drive. But in the learning process, it's like fertilizing, watering, and nurturing the plants, right? Encoding knowledge is nurturing the plants using that seed planting metaphor. So it's not enough to just plant the seeds. You need to nurture the plants to help them grow. And in order for your knowledge and learning to grow, you want to You encode the information, number 1, by creating relevance and context. This is one of the reasons I like to come at different topics from a lot of different angles, using examples where appropriate, using stories, using metaphor where appropriate, all of those. We're creating relevance and context for the information. Now, in terms of active learning, doing note taking, writing down notes when you capture an idea, that can be a really powerful way to start to encode that information, because you're using different sensory modalities. It's no longer just something you're hearing; it's something that you are writing, that you're actually feeling the kinesthetic movement of your fingers as you're writing. That's a reason that you would choose to do handwriting over typing, right? But different kinds of note-taking can be powerful. Also, mind mapping is great because it allows you to start to chunk and group ideas, which forces your brain to think about it at a different level, from a different perspective, from like a removed perspective. Okay, this is related to this, this is related to this, these are the three subcategories of this, all that note-taking. By the way, I'm including a link to my coach Joseph Rodriguez did a breakthrough mind mapping training for me that's part of the BTMSinsiders members library. I'll link that in the description. It's part of what you get with membership. If you want to go deep into mind mapping, like he's an expert on it. He's excellent. So again, talking about encoding knowledge, we're talking about capturing the information as much as possible, making it salient in our minds, making it kind of stick in our minds, and finding different ways to approach that information so it becomes stickier. Now, this is also a reason that I like to dig into principles and strategy, not just superficial techniques and tactics. So I could list like 10 different headline formulas, 3 ways to how to get whatever without whatever, the best way to announcing, like all of these different headline formulas. And tactically, they may all be relevant. But if we focus on why they're all relevant, if we focus on the lessons learned from these being consistently effective headline formulas, then those deeper lessons, the principles and strategy behind them, are encoded in our minds. So when we think about the general rules that lead to a particular technique being effective, then we're forcing our brains to think about it, to create chunks and to encode that information in a more powerful way, because then we start to identify, okay, here are maybe the 5 common principles. Like if we know one principle of direct response advertising is that there must be a call to action with a way to reply, right? A way to take action based on the advertisement. Well, that's going to help us encode the information that might involve making an offer, that might involve response devices, that might involve guarantees, because that's part of taking action, to feel like you're able to take action without risk, that might involve all sorts of different, like a close, right? A call to action, actual, like the close part of a message. And so when we identify these principles and strategies, it allows us to chunk the information, to encode the information in a different way. And when you're studying and you're acquiring information and you're looking at how to encode information, this is where it's really valuable to start to ask yourself questions like, why did they do it this way? If you're looking at a piece of copywriting, a piece of marketing, why did they do it this way? Where else has this worked? That'll help you identify principles and strategy to identify where something has worked across markets. How might I do this differently? That's another good way, because it puts it in context. It forces you to think critically about it. That was a consistent practice that Gary Ben-Savinga used throughout his copywriting career to become maybe the best copywriter in the world, was constantly like seeing a great ad and saying, how could I do this better, right? How can I use this elsewhere? Again, that's identifying a principle, a strategy, and taking it to another market, identifying another context, another situation, and saying, okay, how would this thing need to be adapted, and what rules would still need to be followed in order for it to be relevant elsewhere, right? And all of this is the process of encoding knowledge. It's about thinking critically about what you're learning, right? If you're just acquiring information, you're not thinking critically about it, and you're not going to be able to recall it, to use it later. But if you're thinking critically about it as it's going in, as it's being saved, then that allows you to use it much more easily later, which brings us to learning copywriting or any other skill, step number 3, which is retrieving knowledge. So we talked about planting the seed, we talked about nurturing the plants. Now we're talking about harvesting the fruit, because if you have done steps 1 and 2 well, you are prepared to use that information. And in fact, I talked recently about copywriting from a flow state, and most great copywriters I know are not like following templates or following frameworks or whatever as they're sitting down and writing, because they've internalized it at that deep level. They acquired the information, they encoded the information, right? And then retrieving becomes fairly second nature, especially as they've practiced retrieving and retrieving and retrieving and retrieving. So I can sit down and I can crank out a sales letter pretty much front to back without referring to notes, but it's because all of it is encoded so strongly through actually all 3 of these steps. So retrieving knowledge is harvesting the fruit of your labors. And one major part of this, and usually the first part, is that you want to practice and apply, practice and apply and repeat, right? So you're learning copywriting, practice copywriting, apply what you're learning, right? And then do it over and 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 over again. And it's even better if you can apply what you're learning in lots of different situations. So, I'm selling this low price book that's an introductory offer. I'm selling this high ticket coaching program. I'm selling this thing in the financial industry. I'm selling this thing in personal development. I'm selling this thing in health. Applying the same principles and strategies across lots of different situations allows your brain to do all of that encoding, re-encoding, and all of that every time you retrieve the information, it's going to also save this new experience as another encoding of that information. And so every time you have a memory, it's re-encoded a little bit differently. And every time you pull out a piece of saved knowledge, it's re-encoded a little bit differently. And so that repetition allows you to have a much more robust understanding of the subject. Now, another great, and this is a classic lesson, one of the best ways to really make sure that you understand and learn something is to teach it, right? So it's not just doing the thing, it's not just repeating the thing, but it's about sharing what you've learned, teaching, mentoring others, leading, right? And I'm not saying that you should start, day 1, you're a complete rookie, and the way that you're going to learn on day 1 is teaching. But fairly quickly, you could share with a peer, hey, check out this thing that I found, right? And in fact, that is one way to, if you want to build up some reputation in the marketplace for sharing information, you don't have to position yourself as some A-list expert authority. You can say, hey, I'm learning this cool stuff. You want to come along for the ride, right? And when we share with others, when we teach others what we're learning, it is also tapping into this retrieving, right? It's tapping into this retrieving knowledge. And so we acquire information, which is just taking it in. We encode that information by processing it as we save it, right? And then we retrieve that information by pulling it back out. And this is it's a loop that continues to make us bigger and bigger experts on whatever the skill is, whatever the topic is, including copywriting. So my call to action for you at the end of this episode, number 1, is ask yourself how you can use this. What part of the learning process have you maybe been not doing as well as you could at? And what could you improve about your learning process by being more intentional with it? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you get more content like this delivered to you. As I said, there's a link in the description to the Breakthrough Mind Mapping course, which is part of the BTMSinsiders streaming library of copywriting and marketing courses where you pay one low fee. You get instant streaming access to everything, including the mind mapping course from Joseph Rodriguez. I'm Roy Furr. This is Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, and I'll catch you again in the next episode. See you soon. Thank you once again for tuning in to this daily episode of Breakthrough Marketing Secrets. Remember, check out the links with this episode for even more value. Now make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, and engage in every way you can to keep this show going and growing and delivering daily value to you. I'll catch you soon for your next big breakthrough.